It was a crisp October afternoon when my world collapsed around me. The maple trees outside our Westchester home had just begun their annual transformation, painting our yard in fiery reds and golds. I'd spent the morning in my study, reviewing blueprints for what would likely be my final major architectural project before semi-retirement. The house was quiet, as it often was these days. Evelyn. And I had grown apart. That much was undeniable. Our conversations had dwindled to logistical exchanges about groceries and utility bills. Our shared bed had become a cold expanse of Egyptian cotton, and silent backs turned away from each other. Still, I'd believed we were just weathering a phase, one of many in our 30 years together. The front door opened with more force than necessary, followed by the clatter of heels against hardwood, and a man's voice I recognized but couldn't immediately place. I set my glasses down and moved toward the living room, feeling an inexplicable heaviness in my chest. "This is a waste of space," the male voice declared. "We should tear down this wall, open the whole thing up." I stopped at the threshold of my living room, momentarily unseen. My wife, Evelyn, stood beside a man roughly 15 years her junior, Tyler Brooks, the landscape architect we'd hired last spring to redesign our garden. His arm was draped possessively around my wife's waist as they surveyed my home like prospective buyers. "Rick!" Evelyn startled when she finally noticed me. She didn't move away from Tyler. "We didn't expect you home." "Clearly," I replied, keeping my voice steady despite the earthquake happening inside me. "This is my home, Eve. I live here." Tyler's smile was the kind reserved for elderly relatives who've outstayed their welcome. "For now," he said. I looked between them, noting the matching gold bands on their ring fingers, neither of which was Evelyn's wedding ring from me. The pieces clicked into horrible place. "How long?" I asked. Simply. "Does it matter?" Evelyn sighed, as if my question was an inconvenience rather than the most important thing I'd ever asked her. 8 months, Tyler answered with a smirk. "But who's counting?" 8 months, while I was working late to secure our retirement, while I was caring for my sister after her surgery, while I was planning our anniversary trip to Italy. "I think you should leave," I said to Tyler, maintaining my composure through sheer force of will. That's when it happened. Tyler Brooks, a man who'd shaken my hand, accepted my checks, and apparently been sleeping with my wife, walked deeper into my living room, sprawled himself across my leather armchair and laughed. "Actually, Rick, I think you're confused about the situation." He pulled a folded document from his jacket pocket and tossed it onto the coffee table. "She owns it now, old man. Get your stuff out." Evelyn stood behind him, arms crossed, lips pursed in satisfaction. She didn't even look at me, just at the house, our house, as if she already imagined it, redecorated with Tyler's belongings instead of mine. "The deed is in both our names, Eve," I reminded her, the lawyer's warnings from decades ago, suddenly ringing in my ears. My father had insisted on prenuptial agreements and separate property designations, but I'd been young and in love, certain those precautions were for people who didn't understand true commitment. "Not anymore," Tyler said. "Your lovely wife had some papers drawn up last month. You were so busy with that Boston project you signed without reading. Classic mistake." I felt the blood drain from my face as fragmented memories surfaced. Evelyn at my desk with insurance documents that needed immediate signing, her uncharacteristic interest in my work schedule, the missing pages from our home filing cabinet. "That's fraud," I said quietly. "It's done," Evelyn replied with a shrug. "The house is mine now, and I want you out by Friday." 3 decades dissolved in 3 seconds. Every anniversary, every Christmas, every quiet Sunday morning reading the paper together, all of it seemed to evaporate in the cold reality of her betrayal. "You never loved me," I said, the realization hitting me like physical pain. For the first time, Evelyn's composure cracked slightly. "I did once, but you got old, Rick. You got predictable and tired. Tyler makes me feel alive and rich," Tyler added with a wink. I stood there, absorbing the twin blows of personal and financial betrayal, when my phone vibrated in my pocket. I glanced down at the message, and a strange calm washed over me. "I see," I said, pocketing my phone. "Would you excuse me for a moment? I need to make a call." Tyler laughed. "Call your lawyer if you want. The paperwork's ironclad." Walked to the kitchen, my legs somehow supporting me despite the emotional earthquake. With trembling fingers, I replied to the text message, "Yes, please come now. Bring everything." When I returned to the living room, Tyler was outlining renovation plans to Evelyn, who nodded eagerly. "We'll start with getting rid of all this outdated furniture," she was saying. "Those architectural books can go to Goodwill." "My architectural library is coming with me," I said quietly, "along with my personal belongings." "Sure, take your clothes and books," Tyler said magnanimously. "Everything else stays." "Including my grandmother's silver?" I asked. "Especially that," Evelyn replied. "It's worth a fortune, and technically it came to me when we married." I nodded slowly, watching the clock above the mantel. "And my parents' inheritance? The money that paid for this house in the first place?" Something flickered across Evelyn's face, the first sign of uncertainty. "That's complicated." "Is it?" I asked, just as the doorbell rang. Tyler raised an eyebrow. "Expecting someone?" I allowed myself the smallest of smiles. "As a matter of fact, I am." The doorbell rang again, more insistently this time. Evelyn moved to answer it, but I was already crossing the room, opening the door to reveal Judge Samuel Green, still in his judicial robes, a thick folder tucked under his arm, and a court officer standing beside him. "Right on time, Sam," I said, ushering them in. "Rick," the judge nodded solemnly. "Is this everyone who needs to be present?" I gestured to the living room, where Tyler stood, frozen mid-stride, and Evelyn stared with widening eyes. "Yes," I said. "Everyone's here now." 6 months earlier, I had begun to notice subtle changes in Evelyn, small details that seemed insignificant in isolation, but formed a troubling pattern when viewed collectively. Credit card bills with unfamiliar restaurant charges, late nights allegedly spent with her sister Beth, who, when I casually mentioned these get-togethers, seemed puzzled, new clothing that appeared in her closet without explanation, weekend art classes that left no paintings or sketches in their wake. I didn't want to be that husband, suspicious, controlling, invasive, but after 30 years together you develop a sixth sense for disruption in your shared rhythm. Something was off, and it nagged at me like an architectural design with proportions just slightly askew. The definitive moment came during a charity gala for the Westchester Historical Preservation Society. I'd stepped away to speak with the mayor about a potential renovation project when I glimpsed Evelyn in an alcove with Tyler Brooks. Their body language told a story I didn't want to read, her hand lingering on his wrist, his lips too close to her ear, twin expressions of conspiratorial intimacy. That night I lay awake beside my sleeping wife and made a decision. Not confrontation, not yet, but preparation. The next morning I called my old friend Samuel Green. We'd attended Columbia together before his path led to law, and eventually the bench, while mine veered toward architecture. Over coffee in his chambers, I laid out my suspicions and fears. "You need to protect yourself, Rick," Sam advised, his judicial demeanor giving way to friendly concern. "If what you suspect is true, you're dealing with a calculated betrayal, not just an affair." He helped me assemble a team, a private investigator, a forensic accountant, and a lawyer specializing in estate protection. Together they constructed a safety net I prayed I'd never need. The investigator documented meetings between Evelyn and Tyler, dating back nearly a year. The accountant discovered alarming transactions, money moving from our joint accounts into a newly established fund under Evelyn's maiden name. Most disturbing were the inquiries she'd made about the deed to our home and my parents' inheritance, which had paid for the majority of our property. "She's setting you up, Rick," my lawyer warned during a discreet meeting at his office. "These patterns suggest she's planning to secure assets before initiating divorce proceedings." I spent sleepless nights wrestling with this revelation. How do you process the fact that the person who knows your deepest vulnerabilities is actively exploiting them? How do you face each breakfast, each casual goodbye kiss, knowing it's all theater? I threw myself into work, taking on the Boston Historical Renovation project as both distraction and financial safeguard. The commute gave me time to think, to plan, to grieve for a marriage that had apparently died without my knowledge. One rainy Tuesday, Evelyn approached me in my study with a stack of papers. "Insurance updates," she explained with a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. "They need your signature right away for the rates to lock in." I noticed her manicured nail pointing to signature lines on pages where the preceding text was conveniently obscured by other documents. In that moment, I knew we'd crossed a threshold. This wasn't just infidelity, this was calculated fraud. "I'll look these over tonight," I told her. Her smile, faltered. They need it now, Rick. The agent is waiting for my call. Then he can wait until morning, I replied, gathering the papers. I never sign anything without reading it first. You know that. Later that night, I carefully examined what she'd tried to get me to sign, documents that would have transferred sole ownership of our house to her, along with access to investment accounts that contained my parents' inheritance. The next day, I drove to Judge Green's office with the papers. This is attempted fraud, Sam confirmed, examining the documents. These signature pages don't match the documents they're supposedly attached to. What do I do? I asked, feeling hollow. Sam leaned back in his chair. You have two choices, Rick. Confront her now, or let this play out and be prepared when she makes her move. I chose the latter. Working with Sam and my lawyer, I secured the actual property deed and my parents' inheritance documentation in a safety deposit box. I updated my will, explicitly detailing the origin of our house's funding. Most importantly, I gathered irrefutable evidence of the attempted fraud. When she makes her move, Sam advised, call me immediately. I'll bring the authenticated documents myself. Why not just divorce her now? My lawyer had asked, puzzled by my restraint. The answer was complex. Part of me still hoped I was wrong. Part of me needed to understand the full extent of her betrayal before acting. And perhaps most importantly, a deeper part of me knew that the truth revealed at the right moment would be more powerful than any preemptive strike. So I waited, watching my wife's growing confidence, noting Tyler's increasingly frequent visits to consult on landscaping, documenting each suspicious transaction and conversation. I became a detective in my own marriage, accumulating evidence while maintaining a facade of oblivion. The facade cracked occasionally. Once, finding Evelyn's phone unlocked on the counter, I glimpsed messages between her and Tyler discussing their future in the house after the old man was gone. Another time, I overheard her on the phone with her sister, explaining how she'd secured her future and would soon be starting fresh. Each revelation was a knife twist, but I channeled my pain into methodical preparation. I quietly moved irreplaceable items, my parents' photos, my grandmother's handwritten recipes, my architectural awards, to a small apartment I rented under the pretense of needing a place to stay during late nights on the Boston project. You're handling this with remarkable restraint, Sam observed during one of our meetings. Most men would have exploded by now. What would that accomplish? I asked. A confrontation without evidence would just give her, warning, I need to understand exactly what I'm facing. The final piece fell into place when my private investigator delivered photographs of Evelyn and Tyler at a courthouse in Connecticut, applying for a marriage license. The date on the application was shockingly premature, 3 weeks in the future. They weren't just planning to divorce me, they were already arranging their next chapter while I was still unwittingly living in the current one. That night I finalized my contingency plan with Sam. When they make their move, I told him, be ready to bring everything. The real deed, the inheritance documentation, the evidence of attempted fraud, and your judicial authority to authenticate it all on the spot. And then what? Sam asked. I looked out his office window at the Westchester, Courthouse Square, watching couples stroll hand in hand, their futures seemingly secure in their shared trust. And then, I said quietly, I reclaim what's mine, not out of vengeance, but out of justice. Judge Green nodded slowly. I'll be ready when you call. I left his office feeling strangely light, as if preparing for the worst had somehow freed me from the fear of it. The truth would speak for itself. I just needed to be patient enough to let it happen on its own terms. That patience was about to be tested in ways I never imagined. The silence that filled my living room was deafening. Judge Samuel Green stood in his official robes, the weight of judicial authority adding gravity to his presence. The court officer beside him maintained a professional stance, his expression neutral, but watchful. What the hell is this? Tyler finally broke the silence, his previous swagger deflating like a punctured balloon. Samuel Green, Circuit Court Judge for Westchester County. Sam introduced himself formally. And you are? Tyler Brooks, he replied automatically, then seemed to regret offering his real name. What's going on here, Rick? You can't just bring a judge into a civil matter. Judge Green is an old friend, I explained calmly, and this isn't just a civil matter, it's about fraud, forgery, and attempted theft. Evelyn stepped forward, her composure returning. This is ridiculous. We have legal paperwork. The house is mine. Sam placed his folder on the coffee table, deliberately covering the document Tyler had tossed there minutes earlier. Mrs. Callahan, I've known your husband since our college days at Columbia. When he came to me with concerns about potentially fraudulent activity involving your marital property, I advised him as both a friend and an officer of the court. You've been spying on me. Evelyn's voice rose, indignation replacing her earlier confidence. I've been protecting myself, I corrected her. There's a difference. Judge E. Green opened his folder and removed several documents. I have here the original deed to this property at 47 Maple Drive, Westchester. It clearly indicates that this house was purchased primarily with funds from the Richard Callahan Family Trust, established following the death of Richard's parents in 1992. Tyler shifted uncomfortably. Eve told me the house was jointly owned. It was, I acknowledged. But not equally. My parents' inheritance provided 80% of the purchase price. That fact was legally documented when we bought this property. That doesn't matter, Evelyn interjected. We've been married 30 years. Everything is communal property. Sam pulled out another document. I also have here the prenuptial agreement you both signed in 1994, stipulating that inherited assets remain separate property. I watched the color drain from Evelyn's face. The prenuptial agreement had been her idea originally. Her parents had insisted, concerned about protecting their daughter's future. The irony wasn't lost on me. You kept that, she whispered. I keep everything important, I replied quietly. Furthermore, Judge Green continued, I have here the documents. Mrs. Callahan attempted to have Mr. Callahan sign last month. He placed the papers on the table. Our forensic analysis confirms these are fraudulent transfers disguised as insurance documents. The signature pages don't match the content pages. Tyler stood abruptly. I didn't know anything about that. Sit down, Mr. Brooks. The court officer spoke for the first time, his tone leaving no room for argument. Tyler complied immediately. Judge Green turned to Evelyn. Mrs. Callahan, attempted fraud is a serious offense. Attempting to transfer property through deception and forgery carries potential criminal penalties. You can't prove I did anything. Evelyn's voice wavered. Actually, I said softly, I can. I nodded to Judge Green, who produced a small flash drive. This contains security footage from this house, recorded over the past 3 months, I explained, including footage of you and Mr. Brooks discussing plans to get rid of the old man and take possession of this house through fraudulent means. Evelyn's face crumpled. You recorded me in my own home. Our home, I corrected. And yes, after finding evidence of your affair and discovering the fraudulent documents, I installed security cameras in the common areas of the house, perfectly legal in New York State. Tyler stood again, this time with resignation rather than defiance. Look, I didn't know about any fraud. Eve told me she was getting divorced and the house was hers. When exactly did she tell you that? I asked. About 8 months ago. I nodded slowly. 8 months ago I was in Boston 4 days a week working on the historical renovation project. 8 months ago I was still buying her flowers every Friday and planning our anniversary trip. Rick, Evelyn began. Please don't, I interrupted gently. There's nothing you can say that will undo this moment. Judge Green cleared his throat. Mrs. Callahan, Mr. Brooks, I strongly suggest you both seek legal counsel while I'm here as a friend today. These documents will be filed officially if necessary. Tyler looked at Evelyn, the realization of their situation finally sinking in. You told me it was all legal. You said he'd signed everything over. I thought he would, she hissed back. How was I supposed to know he'd check? Their unified front collapsed instantly, replaced by mutual recrimination. I watched, them with a strange detachment, as if observing characters in a play rather than the architects of my personal devastation. What happens now? Tyler asked, directing his question to Judge Green rather than to me. That depends on Mr. Callahan, Sam replied, looking to me expectantly. All eyes turned in my direction. In that moment, I felt the weight of 30 years. The joy, the pain, the trust, the betrayal, all of it condensed into a single decision point. I want you both out of my house, I said quietly. Today. Rick, be reasonable, Evelyn pleaded. I need time to pack, to figure things out. You've had 8 months to figure things out, I responded, feeling a calm certainty replace my earlier shock. I'll be staying at my apartment tonight. When I return tomorrow, I expect you to be gone. You can take your personal clothing and toiletries, nothing else." "You can't do that," she protested. "Actually, he can," Judge Green interjected. "The property is legally his. You attempted to defraud him. Frankly, Mrs. Callahan, you should be grateful your husband isn't pursuing criminal charges." Tyler grabbed his jacket from the back of my chair. "I'm out of here." "Tyler!" Evelyn called after him, panic rising in her voice. He paused at the doorway, looking back with a mixture of anger and embarrassment. "You told me he was clueless, Eve. You said this would be easy." He gestured around the room. "This isn't what I signed up for." "So much for till death do us part," I observed dryly as he walked out the door. Evelyn stood alone now, her carefully constructed plan disintegrating before her eyes. "The court officer will remain here while you pack essential items," Judge Green informed her. "You'll be contacted by Mr. Callahan's attorney regarding divorce proceedings." "Divorce?" she echoed, as if the concept was somehow unexpected despite her own plans. "Yes, Eve," I said, finally allowing a trace of sadness into my voice. "Divorce. This marriage ended the moment you decided to replace me instead of talking to me." She looked at me with tears forming in her eyes, whether from genuine remorse or frustrated plans. I couldn't tell anymore. "You were never home," she whispered. "You were always working, always focused on your buildings and designs." "I was building our future," I replied simply. "I just didn't realize you'd planned a different one. Without me." As she climbed the stairs to pack her things, Judge Green placed a hand on my shoulder. "You handled that with remarkable restraint," he said quietly. "What would anger accomplish?" I asked. "She's already taken enough from me. I won't give her my dignity too." Sam nodded thoughtfully. "What will you do now?" I looked around the living room. The space where I'd built a life I thought was solid, secure, permanent. Now it felt like a stage set, the reality behind it revealed as hollow. "I'm going to rebuild," I said, "just like I've always done." The house felt cavernous in the days following Evelyn's departure. 30 years of marriage had filled every corner with shared history, photographs on the mantel, books with both our notes in the margins, furniture chosen together. During weekend trips to antique stores in the Hudson Valley, now these objects felt like artifacts from someone else's life, museum pieces I was somehow tasked with curating. I moved through the rooms deliberately, cataloguing what remained and what was missing. Evelyn had taken more than her personal clothing and toiletries, despite Judge Green's instructions. Her grandmother's silver was gone, along with several valuable paintings and my mother's jade necklace, an heirloom I'd planned to give her on our 35th anniversary. My lawyer advised me to report the thefts, but I declined. Some battles weren't worth fighting, and I couldn't bear the thought of police reports and inventories of loss. I was already living an inventory of loss. The first week passed in a fog of practical matters, changing locks, rerouting mail, notifying our bank of the situation. Friends called with hesitant voices, having heard fragments of the story through Westchester's efficient gossip network. I offered abbreviated explanations, protecting what little privacy remained. "Rick, you need to get out of that house," my sister Margaret insisted during one of her daily check-in calls. "Come stay with us for a while." "I appreciate the offer, Maggie, but I need to be here," I told her. "This is still my home." "It's a mausoleum," she countered. "You're surrounded by ghosts." Perhaps she was right, but I wasn't ready to abandon the space I'd designed and built with my own hands. Our house had been my first major architectural project, a Tudor-inspired design with modern elements that had later become my professional signature. Every beam and archway held my creativity and care. Evelyn might have betrayed me, but the house remained faithful. 2 weeks after the confrontation, I was reviewing blueprints in my study when the doorbell rang. I opened the front door to find Beth, Evelyn's younger sister, standing on my porch with an uncomfortable expression. "I didn't know if you'd see me," she said hesitantly. "Why wouldn't I?" I stepped aside to let her in. "You're not responsible for your sister's actions." Beth followed me to the kitchen, where I put on a pot of coffee. We'd always gotten along well. She was pragmatic and straightforward, qualities her sister had once possessed, but somewhere along the way had traded for social climbing and materialism. "I came to return something," Beth said, placing a small velvet pouch on the counter. "Mom's jade necklace. Eve brought it to Sunday dinner, wearing it like some kind of trophy. When I asked where she got it, she said it was part of her settlement." I picked up the pouch, feeling its familiar weight. "Thank you," I said simply. I took it when she wasn't looking, Beth continued. I told her I'd call the police. If she didn't let me return it to you, we had a huge fight. She paused, wrapping her hands around the coffee mug I offered. I don't understand her anymore, Rick. The sister I grew up with would never have done this. People change, I replied, surprised by how little bitterness I felt. Sometimes slowly enough that we don't notice until they've become someone else entirely. She's living in Tyler's condo in White Plains, Beth volunteered. It's half the size of this place. She's already complaining about the lack of storage space. I almost smiled at the poetic justice, but couldn't quite manage it. And Tyler? How's he adjusting to full-time Evelyn? Beth snorted. He's discovering that weekends with a mistress and daily life with a partner are very different experiences. She called me crying yesterday because he complained about her spending habits. We sat in companionable silence for a moment, the autumn sunlight streaming through my kitchen windows, illuminating dust particles dancing in the air. What about you, Rick? What happens next? Beth finally asked. It was a question I'd been avoiding, focusing instead on immediate practicalities. What did happen next? After your life's central assumption, that you were loved and respected by your partner, proved false. I'm finishing the Boston project next month, I said. After that, I'm not sure. Maybe I'll travel for a while. Beth studied me over her coffee cup. You know what I always thought? Even before all this happened? What's that? That you deserved better than my sister. She said it, matter-of-factly, without drama. You built your whole life around making her happy, and she never seemed to notice. I wanted to defend Evelyn instinctively. A habit of 30 years doesn't disappear overnight, but found I couldn't summon the energy. There were good years, I offered instead. I'm sure there were, Beth acknowledged, but there could have been better ones with someone who actually saw you. After Beth left, I found myself standing in Evelyn's closet, now half empty, with lonely hangers where her designer clothes had once hung. The space still held her scent, a perfume I'd given her last Christmas. Chanel No. 5. Classic, elegant, expensive. I wondered if Tyler knew to buy it for her, or if she would simply replace me as the gift-giver in her life the way she'd tried to replace me in this house. I methodically began removing the remaining items, shoes she'd deemed not worth taking, scarves forgotten in drawers, the jewelry she considered too inexpensive to bother with. Each object went into donation boxes, my movements mechanical and deliberate. It wasn't anger driving me, but something more fundamental, the need to reclaim my space, to exorcise the evidence of betrayal from my daily environment. As I worked, my phone rang repeatedly, clients checking on project timelines, friends offering support, my lawyer with updates on divorce proceedings. I let everything go to voicemail. This task required my complete attention, this ritualistic clearing away of 30 years. When the closet was finally empty, I sat on the floor and allowed myself to feel the full weight of what had happened, not just the betrayal and humiliation, but the recognition that I had been complicit in my own unhappiness for years, working endless hours, accepting Evelyn's increasing coldness as normal, ignoring the warning signs of her dissatisfaction and deception. You missed it all, I said aloud to the empty room. You built beautiful buildings for strangers while your own house crumbled from within. That night I slept in the guest bedroom, unable to face our marital bed alone. Before falling asleep, I made a list, something I'd done throughout my professional life when facing complex problems. But this list wasn't about architectural challenges or project timelines. It was simpler. Things I want now. I stared at the blank page for nearly an hour before writing a single word. For so long my wants had been subsumed by work responsibilities and Evelyn's desires. I had built my identity around being a provider, a creator of spaces for others, a husband supporting his wife's social aspirations. Who was I without those roles? What did Richard Callahan, just Richard, not husband or architect or provider, actually want? I finally wrote, peace. Then, after another long pause, purpose beyond work. And finally, a home that feels like home again. It wasn't much, but it was a start. The first blueprint for a life I'd never planned to build, but now had no choice but to design. Winter descended on Westchester with uncharacteristic ferocity that year. Snow piled in drifts against my windows, and the old house creaked under the weight of ice and memories. I finished the Boston project ahead of schedule, throwing myself into work with the singular focus of someone avoiding introspection. My client, impressed with both the quality and speed of the renovation, recommended me for a historical preservation commission, a prestigious appointment I would have celebrated enthusiastically in my previous life. Now, I accepted with polite gratitude but little excitement. Professional accomplishments felt hollow in the face of personal collapse. The divorce proceedings moved forward with clinical efficiency. Evelyn, faced with overwhelming evidence of her attempted fraud, agreed to an uncontested divorce. Her initial demands, half the house's value, a portion of my retirement accounts, ongoing alimony, evaporated when my lawyer presented the security, footage of her and Tyler discussing their plans. "She's lucky you're not pressing charges," my lawyer remarked after a particularly tense mediation session. "Most men in your position would want blood." "I don't want her blood," I replied. "I just want this over." December arrived, bringing with it the first holiday season of my new solitary existence. I declined invitations to Christmas parties, unable to face the pitying looks and hushed conversations that would inevitably follow me around rooms decorated with festive cheer I couldn't feel. Instead, I used the vacation time I'd accumulated to start a project I'd been contemplating since the night I made my list. I began renovating my own home. Not the structural elements, those remained solid, a testament to my younger self's architectural skill. Instead, I focused on transforming the interior spaces that still echoed with Evelyn's presence. The master bedroom, with its king-sized bed where we'd grown increasingly distant, became my first target. I dismantled the bed frame, donating it to a women's shelter in White Plains. The matching dressers and nightstands followed. I stripped wallpaper Evelyn had selected 15 years earlier, painted over the sage green she'd insisted matched her complexion, and ripped up carpet that held decades of shared footsteps. Physical labor provided a welcome counterpoint to the intellectual work of my profession. There was something purifying about destruction as a prelude to creation, the empty room representing possibility rather than loss. I worked through Christmas Eve and Christmas Day, my tools keeping me company, as snow fell silently outside. On New Year's Eve, with the bedroom renovation nearly complete, my doorbell rang unexpectedly. I opened it to find Judge Green standing on my porch, a bottle of Macallan 18 in hand. "No one should drink alone on New Year's Eve," he said simply. I let him in, grateful for the company despite my self-imposed isolation. We settled in my study, the one room I hadn't yet altered, and Sam poured generous measures of scotch into crystal tumblers Evelyn had somehow overlooked in her hasty departure. "To new beginnings," he offered, raising his glass. "To survival," I countered, the scotch burning pleasantly as I swallowed. Sam glanced around the study, taking in the stacks of architectural books, the drafting table covered, with renovation sketches, the walls still adorned with my professional awards and family photographs. "You're changing the house," he observed. "I'm reclaiming it," I corrected, "making it mine again." "And the architectural practice? Will you continue?" I sipped my drink, considering the question. "I'm not sure. The Preservation Commission starts in March, but beyond that," I trailed off, uncertain how to articulate my professional ambivalence. "You know," Sam said thoughtfully, "I went through something similar after Sarah died. Not betrayal, but that same sense of having to rebuild a life you never planned to live alone." I nodded, remembering his wife's battle with cancer 5 years earlier. "How did you do it?" "Badly at first," he admitted with a rueful smile. "I made all the classic mistakes, worked too much, drank too much, isolated myself from friends who reminded me of her." "Sounds familiar," I acknowledged, gesturing to my empty house and the half-finished scotch. "But eventually," Sam continued, "I realized that rebuilding isn't just about erasing what was lost. It's about incorporating it into something new. The pain doesn't go away, but it becomes part of the foundation rather than the entire structure." We talked until midnight, the conversation flowing more easily with each measure of scotch. As the clock struck 12 and fireworks erupted over the Hudson River in the distance, Sam raised his glass again. "This year will be better, Rick. Not because circumstances will magically improve, but because you're stronger than you know." After he left, I stood in the doorway of my half-renovated bedroom, contemplating his words. The bare walls and exposed floorboards represented both destruction and possibility, an apt metaphor for my current state. I decided then that I would finish this room before making any decisions about my professional future. January passed in a blur of focused labor. I installed hardwood floors myself, something I'd never done despite decades designing homes for others. I chose furnishings that reflected my personal taste rather than compromises reached through marital negotiation. A platform bed with clean lines, bookshelves built into the walls, a reading chair positioned to catch the morning light. When the bedroom was complete, I moved on to the kitchen, then the living room, working methodically through each space. The physical transformation of the house paralleled an internal shift I was only beginning to recognize, a gradual recalibration of identity from husband and provider to something not yet fully defined but increasingly authentic. In February, just as I was completing the living room renovation, Beth called with news that sent me reeling. "Tyler left her," she said without preamble. "He's gone back to his ex-wife." I sat heavily on my new sofa, unsure how to respond. "I'm sorry," I finally managed, surprised to discover I meant it. "Don't be," Beth replied. "She made her choices. The problem is, she's claiming she has nowhere to go. She asked if she could stay with me, but Rob would lose his mind." I understood her husband's reluctance. "What will she do?" "That's why I'm calling." Beth hesitated. "She's talking about coming to see you. Something about reconciliation and second chances." The thought of Evelyn returning to the house she'd tried to steal, seeing the changes I'd made, attempting to reclaim her place in my life, it filled me with a cold dread. "If she comes here," I said slowly, "I won't turn her away, but I won't invite her back either. She doesn't deserve your kindness, Rick. This isn't about what she deserves. It's about who I choose to be." After hanging up, I walked through my renovated spaces, suddenly seeing them through Evelyn's hypothetical eyes. Would she recognize the home we'd shared? Would she understand that each changed element represented not just aesthetic preference but psychological necessity? The house had become a physical manifestation of my healing process, evidence that life continued, transformed but not destroyed, after betrayal. 3 days later, my doorbell rang on a snowy afternoon. I opened it to find Evelyn standing there, looking smaller somehow, her designer coat unable to disguise the weight she'd lost or the new lines around her eyes. "Rick," she said softly, "can I come in?" I stepped aside, wordlessly, allowing her into the foyer. She glanced around, taking in the changes immediately, the new paint colors, the absence of her collected artwork, the different furniture arrangement. "You've been busy," she observed, her voice carefully neutral. "It was time for a change," I replied, leading her into the living room where we'd had our confrontation months earlier. "Would you like some tea?" She nodded, sitting tentatively on the edge of my new leather sofa. I busied myself in the kitchen, grateful for the momentary reprieve from her presence. When I returned with 2 steaming mugs, she was examining the bookshelves where family photographs once stood, now replaced with architectural models and art books. "You've erased me," she said, accepting the tea. "No, Eve, you erased yourself when you decided our life together wasn't enough." She winced at my words but didn't argue. "Tyler went back to Melissa. Beth told me. I'm sorry." Evelyn looked up sharply. "Are you?" "Yes," I said simply. "I wouldn't wish that kind of rejection on anyone. Not even you." We sat in silence for several minutes, the gulf between us filled with unspoken histories and divergent futures. Finally, Evelyn placed her mug on the coffee table and squared her shoulders. "I was hoping," she began, then faltered. "Beth said I shouldn't come here, that you'd moved on, but I thought maybe, given time, we could try again." I studied Evelyn across the coffee table that separated us, a physical manifestation of the emotional distance between who we had been and who we had become. Her familiar features now seemed to belong to a stranger, someone I might pass on the street with a polite nod but no recognition. "Try again," I echoed, the words feeling hollow in the renovated living room. "After you conspired to steal my home? After you planned to replace me while I was still faithfully married to you?" She flinched but held her ground. "I made a terrible mistake. I got caught up in something that seemed exciting, and I lost sight of what was important." "Which was?" 30 years, Rick. 30 years of building a life together. That has to count for something." I took a deliberate sip of my tea, buying time to process the surreal nature of this conversation. After months of pain and rebuilding, after the humiliation of discovering her betrayal, Evelyn sat before me offering reconciliation as if mending a minor disagreement. It did count for something, I said finally. That's why your betrayal was so devastating. If our marriage had meant nothing, your actions would have hurt less. I understand that. No, I interrupted gently. I don't think you do. You're here because Tyler left, not because you've had a genuine change of heart. You're looking for security, not reconciliation. Her expression hardened slightly. That's not fair. I've had months to think about what I threw away. Months you spent with him in his condo, wearing the ring he gave you, I reminded her. You're only reconsidering now because your plan B collapsed. So that's it? 30 years erased because of one mistake? I leaned forward, meeting her gaze directly. It wasn't one mistake, Eve. It was hundreds of small choices that led to calculated betrayal. You didn't just fall into bed with Tyler in a moment of weakness. You planned to take everything from me. Tears formed in her eyes, but I couldn't tell if they stemmed from genuine remorse or frustration at my resistance. What do I have to do to prove I'm sorry, that I want to make amends? Nothing, I said simply. There's nothing to prove because there's nothing to rebuild. You don't mean that, she whispered. We have history. We have had, I corrected. We had history. Now we have consequences. Evelyn set down her cup with a clatter. You've changed, she accused. Yes, I agreed. That tends to happen when your life explodes. She stood and walked to the window, looking out at the snow-covered yard where we'd once hosted summer barbecues and autumn gatherings. I wondered if she was remembering those times or calculating her next approach. I have nowhere to go, she finally said, turning back to face me. Tyler's gone. I can't afford an apartment on my own yet. Beth won't take me in. Ah, there it was. The real purpose of her visit. Not reconciliation, but necessity. I felt a curious mix of disappointment and relief. I'll help you get settled somewhere, I offered. I can cover 3 months' rent while you find a job and get back on your feet. She stared at me, incredulous. You'd do that? After everything? I'm not doing it for you, I clarified. I'm doing it because it's who I want to be, the kind of person who doesn't leave others homeless, even when they've hurt me. And us? Is there any chance? Yes. No, Eve, that chapter is closed. She nodded slowly, accepting this reality with surprising grace. What will you do with the house? It's so big for just one person. I'm not sure yet. Maybe sell it eventually, once the divorce is final. It's a beautiful home, she said softly. I never appreciated how much of yourself you put into designing it. No, I agreed. You didn't. We lapsed into silence again, the afternoon light casting long shadows across my renovated living room. After a while, Evelyn gathered her coat and purse, preparing to leave. Can I ask you something? She said, pausing at the door. Would you have forgiven me if I'd come back before Tyler left? If I'd realized my mistake on my own? It was a hypothetical question with no practical relevance, yet I gave it serious consideration. Would I have? Could betrayal of this magnitude ever be forgiven? I don't know, I answered honestly. Forgiveness might have been possible. Reconciliation, I'm less certain. She nodded, accepting this ambiguous answer. I am sorry, Rick. Not just because things didn't work out with Tyler, but because I hurt someone who never deserved it. I believe you, I said, and was surprised to realize I did. Take care of yourself, Eve. After she left, I sat alone in my living room for hours, processing the unexpected encounter. There was a finality to it that our legal proceedings had somehow lacked, an emotional closure that paperwork couldn't provide. I felt neither vindication nor bitterness, just a quiet certainty that I had navigated the conversation with the dignity I'd promised myself I would maintain. The next morning, I contacted a realtor. It was time to consider selling the house. Despite my renovations, despite reclaiming each room, the structure itself held too many memories, both beautiful and painful, to serve as the foundation for my next chapter. March arrived with the Preservation Commission appointment and an unexpected offer from Columbia University to teach an advanced architectural studio course. The prospect of mentoring young architects appealed to me in a way that traditional client work no longer did. I accepted both positions, gradually constructing a new professional identity that balanced creative fulfillment with reasonable working hours. I found an apartment in Manhattan, a pre-war building, with high ceilings and character walking distance from Columbia. The commute to Westchester for commission meetings was manageable, and the urban energy provided a welcome contrast to the isolated suburban existence I'd inhabited during the worst of my personal crisis. As promised, I helped Evelyn secure a modest apartment and covered her initial expenses. We communicated primarily through our lawyers, the brief face-to-face reconciliation attempt remaining our last significant personal interaction. I heard through Beth that Evelyn had found work as an office manager at a local medical practice, a position far removed from the social status she'd once prioritized, but offering stability she now seemed to value. The divorce became final in April. I signed the papers in my lawyer's office, feeling not the crushing grief I'd anticipated, but something quieter, a bittersweet acknowledgement that endings, even painful ones, created space for new beginnings. That evening, I met Sam for dinner at a small Italian restaurant in the city. We'd maintained our friendship throughout the process, his perspective as both a judge and a widower, providing valuable guidance during my darkest moments. "So," he said, raising his wine glass, "to freedom." I clinked my glass against his. "To new chapters." "How does it feel?" he asked, "being officially single after 3 decades?" I considered the question carefully. "Like taking off a jacket that once fit perfectly, but gradually became constrictive. There's relief, but also awareness of vulnerability." Sam nodded, understanding. "The paperwork is the easy part. The emotional untangling takes longer." "Does it ever finish completely?" I asked. "No," he admitted. "But eventually the past becomes just one chapter in a longer story, rather than the defining narrative." I hoped he was right. For now, I was focused on practical matters, finalizing the sale of the house, settling into my new apartment, preparing for my first teaching semester. The structure of these tasks provided scaffolding as I continued internal renovations more complex than any architectural project. "I have something for you," Sam said, reaching into his briefcase. He pulled out a small wrapped package and slid it across the table. Inside I found a silver compass, elegantly crafted and clearly antique. "It belonged to my grandfather," Sam explained. "He gave it to me when I graduated law school. He said sometimes in life we find ourselves in uncharted territory, and the only way forward is to trust our internal compass." I ran my thumb over the engraved surface, deeply moved by both the gift and its symbolism. "Sam, I can't accept this. It's a family heirloom." "Consider it a loan then," he replied with a smile. "Until you're certain of your direction again." As we finished dinner and parted ways on the busy Manhattan sidewalk, I slipped the compass into my pocket, its weight strangely comforting. I walked back to my new apartment through streets filled with strangers, each carrying their own hidden stories of love, loss, betrayal, and resilience. For the first time in months, I felt not just resignation to my changed circumstances, but genuine curiosity about what might lie ahead. The path wasn't clear yet, but I was beginning to trust that I would find my way, one step at a time. September arrived with crisp air and fresh beginnings. 6 months had passed since I'd sold the Westchester house, a transaction that had closed with surprising emotional ease. The new owners, a young family with twin toddlers and ambitious renovation plans, had breathed immediate life into spaces that had grown too heavy with my past. I'd walked through one final time before the closing, touching doorframes and windowsills, silently thanking the structure for sheltering both my happiest and most painful moments. Now standing before a lecture hall of eager architecture students at Columbia, I found myself energized in ways my corporate projects hadn't managed in years. Teaching had awakened something I'd forgotten, the pure joy of creation untethered from client demands and budget constraints. Architecture isn't just about buildings, I told my advanced studio class. It's about creating spaces where life happens, where people fall in love, raise children, pursue dreams, weather storms. Your designs will frame human experiences for generations. A young woman in the front row raised her hand. "Professor Callahan, how do you balance client expectations with architectural integrity?" I smiled, remembering my own struggles with this very question throughout my career. That's the central challenge of commercial architecture. Sometimes you compromise, sometimes you persuade. The art is knowing which battles are worth fighting. After class, I gathered my materials, still adjusting to being addressed as Professor. A knock at the door interrupted my thoughts. "Come in," I called, expecting a student with follow-up questions. Instead, Beth entered, looking professional in a tailored suit I hadn't seen before. "Surprise," she said with a smile. "I was meeting a client nearby and thought I'd see if Professor Callahan had time for coffee." "For you, always," I replied, genuinely pleased. We'd maintained regular contact since the divorce, her friendship an unexpected gift from the wreckage of my marriage. We settled at a campus cafe, the afternoon sun warming the outdoor patio despite the autumn chill. "You look good, Rick," Beth observed. "Teaching agrees with you." "It's been surprisingly fulfilling," I admitted. "Watching students discover their creative voice, it reminds me why I fell in love with architecture in the first place." "And the Preservation Commission? How's that going?" "Challenging but rewarding. We're working on saving a 19th century theatre in White Plains. The historical significance is undeniable, but the retrofitting costs are substantial." Beth nodded, stirring her coffee thoughtfully. "And personally, are you seeing anyone?" The question didn't surprise me. Beth had been gently encouraging me to consider dating for months, even offering to introduce me to colleagues from her law firm. "Not actively," I replied, though I had an interesting conversation with another professor at last week's faculty mixer, art history department. "Interesting how?" Beth leaned forward, clearly pleased by this development. "Just interesting," I demurred, not ready to analyze the subtle chemistry I'd felt with Dr. Catherine Chen, with her passionate theories about the intersection of architecture and social change. "We're having lunch next week to discuss potential cross-departmental projects." Beth said skeptically. "Professional lunch, of course." I changed the subject. "How's Evelyn doing?" I asked, surprising myself with the genuine curiosity behind the question. Beth's expression softened. "Better, actually. She's still at the medical practice, got a promotion to office director last month. She's seeing a therapist regularly, and she's reconnected with some old friends, not the social climber crowd, but people she knew before." She trailed off. "Before she became obsessed with status," I finished for her. "I'm glad she's finding her way. She asks about you sometimes." Beth ventured carefully. "What do you tell her?" "The truth. That you've built a new life that seems to suit you better than the old one ever did." I considered this assessment, finding it remarkably accurate. Despite the trauma of betrayal and the pain of dismantling a 30-year marriage, I had indeed constructed a life more authentic to my true self than the one I'd lost. "Do you ever think about what you would have done if she hadn't betrayed you?" Beth asked. "If you'd just continued in that marriage?" The question caught me off guard with its directness, but I'd thought about this often enough to have an answer ready. "I would have missed this," I said, simply gesturing to encompass not just the university campus, but the entirety of my reimagined life. I would have continued compromising, working too much, ignoring the growing distance. I would have mistaken comfort for fulfillment. Beth nodded slowly. "Sometimes the worst things that happen to us create space for the best things to find us." "Exactly," I agreed, though I wouldn't recommend betrayal as a personal growth strategy. She laughed, and we moved on to lighter topics: her children's college adventures, my new apartment's ongoing decoration challenges, the latest family gossip. When we parted ways an hour later, I felt the familiar gratitude for this unexpected friendship that had emerged from my darkest chapter. Walking back to my office, I passed the art history building and impulsively decided to stop by Catherine Chen's office. Her door was open, papers spread across her desk as she graded with focused intensity, her dark hair falling forward to frame her face. "Is this a bad time?" I asked from the doorway. She looked up, surprise giving way to a warm smile. "Rick, not at all. I was just finishing these essays on Bauhaus influence in post-war American design. Some of my students seem to think research means repeating things I vaguely remember hearing somewhere." I laughed, recognizing the universal teaching challenge. "I was wondering if we could move our lunch up. I have some thoughts about that cross-departmental project that I'd like to discuss sooner rather than later." She studied me for a moment, her expression thoughtful. "Is that the only reason?" Her directness was refreshing after years of Evelyn's carefully calculated communications. "No," I admitted. "I also just enjoyed talking with you." Catherine smiled, a slight blush coloring her cheeks. "In that case, how about dinner instead of lunch? Tonight?" "I'd like that very much." As I walked back to my office, I felt a lightness that had been absent for longer than I could remember, longer perhaps than just the past difficult year. Some part of me recognized that I was finally stepping fully into a future of my own design, blueprinted not according to others' expectations, but my own authentic desires. That evening, over Italian food at a small restaurant in Greenwich Village, Catherine and I discovered shared passions beyond our academic interests, hiking the Catskills, obscure foreign films, the perfect ratio of chocolate to nuts in homemade cookies. Our conversation flowed effortlessly from professional to personal, her laugh becoming increasingly familiar as the evening progressed. "So," she said as we shared tiramisu, "you never really answered my question earlier, about why you wanted to see me sooner." I took a moment, wanting to be honest, without moving too quickly. "I've spent most of the past year looking backward, understanding what went wrong in my marriage, rebuilding my life after betrayal. Tonight is the first time I've felt genuinely excited about looking forward." Catherine reached across the table, briefly touching my hand. "Forward is good. Forward is where all the interesting possibilities live." Later, walking her to the subway, we paused on a street corner illuminated by the warm glow of a street lamp. The moment held that peculiar New York City magic, the feeling of perfect privacy amid 8 million people. "I'd like to see you again," I said. "Not just professionally." "I'd like that too," she replied, "though you should know I'm not interested in being anyone's rebound." "Neither am I," I assured her. "Which is why I've waited until now to pursue this. I needed to heal first." She nodded, satisfied with my answer. "Then I look forward to our next non-professional engagement, Professor Callahan." As she descended into the subway, I remained on the corner for a moment, aware that I was experiencing something profound in its ordinariness, the simple pleasure of anticipating another's company. Not tea, out of habit or obligation, but genuine connection. Walking back to my apartment, I passed couples arm in arm, friends laughing outside bars, solitary figures hurrying toward private destinations, the endless human parade that makes up a city night. Each person carrying their own histories, wounds, and hopes, each navigating personal architecture, more complex than any building I'd ever designed. I reached into my pocket and felt Sam's compass, which I still carried as a talisman. For the first time since he'd given it to me, I didn't need its guidance. My direction was becoming clear through the simple act of moving forward, one step at a time. 2 years passed with the accelerating pace that seems to accompany new chapters in life. My position at Columbia evolved from visiting lecturer to tenured professor. My preservation work expanded to include consulting on historical renovations throughout the Northeast, and my relationship with Catherine deepened into something I had never expected to find again, a partnership of equals based on mutual respect and genuine understanding. On a golden October afternoon, I stood in front of the newly restored Westchester Theatre, addressing gathered community members and preservation enthusiasts at the grand reopening ceremony. "Architecture is memory made tangible," I told the attentive crowd. "When we preserve these spaces, we're not just saving bricks and mortar. We're honoring the human experiences that happened here. First dates, marriage proposals, moments of collective joy and sorrow as communities gathered to witness stories unfold." The theatre gleamed behind me, its Art Deco facade meticulously restored, its interior updated with modern amenities while maintaining its historical integrity. The project had consumed much of my professional attention for the past 18 months, becoming a labor of love that symbolized my own restoration process. After the ceremony, as attendees filtered into the theatre for the inaugural film screening, I found myself face to face with Evelyn for the first time in nearly 2 years. She looked well, her hair shorter, her clothing simpler but elegant, her expression more genuine than I remembered from our later years together. "Congratulations, Rick," she said, extending her hand formally. "The restoration is magnificent." "Thank you," I replied, shaking her hand briefly. "Are you here with the medical practice?" Several local businesses had sponsored the restoration, including the practice where she worked. "Yes, Dr. Harriman is inside." She hesitated, then added, "I'm the administrative director now." "Beth mentioned your promotion. Congratulations." An awkward silence fell between us. 30 years of intimacy reduced to polite small talk between virtual strangers. I was searching for an appropriate exit line when Catherine approached, slipping her arm through mine with natural ease. "The reporter from the Times wants a few more quotes," she said, then noticed Evelyn. "Oh, I'm sorry. I didn't mean to interrupt." "Not at all," I replied. "Catherine, this is Evelyn Callahan. Evelyn, this is Dr. Catherine Chen, my partner." The two women exchanged pleasantries with remarkable grace. each taking the measure of the other without obvious judgment. After a moment, Evelyn excused herself to rejoin her colleagues inside the theatre. "So that's her," Catherine said quietly as we watched Evelyn walk away. "That's her," I confirmed. "How do you feel?" I considered the question carefully. "At peace," I finally answered. "There's no anger left, no bitterness, just acknowledgement of a chapter that's closed." Catherine squeezed my arm gently. "You're a good man, Richard Callahan. Most people couldn't reach that place after what you experienced." "I had help," I reminded her, smiling down at the woman who had become such an essential part of my rebuilt life. Later that evening, after the speeches and screenings were complete, Catherine and I walked through the streets of White Plains toward the parking garage. The autumn air carried a hint of wood smoke, and early Halloween decorations adorned storefronts and apartment windows. "I have something to ask you," Catherine said, her tone uncharacteristically hesitant. "It's about the brownstone." The brownstone in question was a historic property in Brooklyn Heights that we'd been casually viewing as a potential shared home. After a year of dividing time between our separate apartments, we'd begun discussing cohabitation with the careful consideration of people who had both experienced failed marriages. "What about it?" I asked. "I think we should make an offer," she said decisively. "I know we said we'd think about it for another month, but I don't need more time. It's the right place for us." I stopped walking and turned to face her. "Are you sure? It needs substantial renovation work." She smiled. "I happen to know a very talented architect who specializes in historical renovations, and I'm pretty handy with a paintbrush myself." "It would be a project," I warned. "At least a year of dust and contractors and decisions about everything from floorboards to light fixtures." "I know," she replied simply. "That's what I want. To build something with you, not just move into a ready-made space. I want a home that reflects both of us from the foundation up." Her words resonated deeply, articulating something I hadn't fully recognized I wanted too. Not just shared space, but shared creation. A home designed and renovated together, embodying our combined vision, rather than one person's preferences accommodated by another's compromise. "Then let's do it," I said. "Let's make an offer." Catherine's face lit with genuine joy. "Really?" "Really," I confirmed. "On one condition." "What's that?" "That you'll marry me once it's finished." The words surprised us both. We hadn't discussed marriage explicitly, though the possibility had hovered unspoken in our conversations about the future. Catherine stared at me for a long moment, her expression shifting from shock to consideration to certainty. "Yes," she said finally, "but I have a condition too." "Name it." "That we don't wait until the brownstone is finished to start our life together. Renovations always take longer than expected, and I don't want to postpone the important parts." I laughed, pulling her close. "Deal." Walking back to the car, arms entwined, I thought about the unexpected journey of the past 3 years, from betrayal to rebuilding, from loss to discovery. The pain hadn't disappeared completely. It had simply been incorporated into the foundation of a stronger, more authentic life. The following weekend, Sam joined us for dinner at Catherine's apartment to celebrate our engagement and the pending offer on the brownstone. He arrived with a bottle of champagne and a small wrapped package. "I believe this belongs to you now," he said, handing me the gift as Catherine opened the champagne. Inside, I found the silver compass he had loaned me 2 years earlier, now mounted in a simple wooden frame with an inscription on a small brass plaque. "True north is not a destination but a direction." "I thought about having it engraved with something about finding your way," Sam explained, "but that seemed too on the nose, even for a judge." "It's perfect," I assured him, deeply moved by both the returned compass and the friendship it represented. "Thank you for guiding me when I needed it most." Catherine raised her glass. "To compasses, chosen family, and new beginnings. And to endings that make way for better chapters," I added. Sam nodded thoughtfully. "I've seen many people destroyed by the kind of betrayal you experienced, Rick. They either collapse inward or become consumed with bitterness and revenge. You did neither." "I had moments of both," I admitted, "but eventually I realized that giving in to those impulses would mean allowing Evelyn's betrayal to determine who I became. I didn't want her to have that power." "That's wisdom many never achieve," Sam said. Later that night, after Sam had gone and Catherine had fallen asleep beside me, I found myself thinking about the strange geometry of life, how lines that seem parallel can suddenly intersect, how solid foundations can crumble without warning, how new structures can rise from ruins. I thought about Evelyn, hoping she had found some measure of peace in her recalibrated life. I thought about Tyler Brooks, whose name I had not heard in years and whose face was already fading from memory. I thought about the house in Westchester, now filled with children's laughter and new dreams. Most of all, I thought about the man I had become through loss and recovery, stronger not, despite vulnerability but because of it, wiser not from avoiding pain but from moving through it with integrity intact. The brownstone would need new wiring, updated plumbing, restored woodwork, reinforced foundations. Catherine and I would argue over paint colors and fixture styles, compromise on cabinet depths and window treatments. We would create a home together, merging our separate visions into something neither of us could have imagined alone. It would be messy and frustrating and deeply satisfying, like all worthwhile creations, like life itself. As sleep finally approached, I remembered something my father had told me when I was just beginning my architectural career. The most important element in any structure isn't visible on the blueprints. It's the space between the walls, the emptiness that allows for movement, growth, and possibility. I understood now what he meant. The most valuable part of what I'd built wasn't the physical spaces I'd designed or even the professional reputation I'd established. It was the capacity to begin again after devastating loss, the courage to remain open to new connections, the wisdom to recognize that some endings, however painful, create necessary space for more authentic beginnings. In architecture and in life, the greatest strength often emerges from the deepest void. The silence after betrayal had become the foundation for my truest voice.